We continue with float fishing, and today we take a look at Bolognese fishing. So, what actually defines Bolognese fishing? How do you use a Bolognese rod best? And what are the really important things you need to pay attention to when using a Bolognese rod? Yes, I am already standing here at the Balaya, and I have actually been experimenting a bit already with the Bolognese rod from the last What to Buy video from level 20. That is where this Bolognese rod, or rather the entire setup, is already being recommended. And yes, I think the first thing you immediately notice with the Bolognese rod is the length. In this case, we are talking about 8 meters here, an 8-meter long telescopic rod, so to speak. Basically, a Bolognese rod is something like a telescopic rod, just with an additional reel mounted on it. And that's what makes the whole thing so interesting. And I just tested a bit whether you could simply use the rod like a telescopic rod. So if we cast it out loosely and then theoretically close the bail, then this is already basically like a telescopic rod. But by using the reel, we also gain the possibility to tire out much heavier fish while playing them. That means we have a kind of safety buffer. Bang, right mouse button, just tap briefly, fish pulled upward. Now I reel just a little bit more, and we already caught the first trout here. Relatively simple, and that was just on a single bait here, so nothing like double bait or anything like that. Just very simple, similar to using an 8-meter telescopic rod. Exactly like that, no cranking, just a hook set, pulled straight up, and it already worked. So yes, that is absolutely one possible way to use this rod. Because it is basically a telescopic rod with a reel, we can simply stand here at the water. I would recommend zooming in a bit. Then we close the bail, and then just like with a telescopic rod, where it would normally be the left mouse button, here we now press the right mouse button, and the fish is instantly there. And if, in that situation, a much too large fish bites, well then the drag on our reel starts working. That means we do not set the drag too high. And if a much too large fish bites, it simply runs. And we then have the option to slowly tire out the fish over time. I have placed 3 Bolognese rods here that are always worth using and that are also good purchases, especially early on. First, we have the cheapest Bolognese rod. This is actually a rod that is more suitable for frog fishing or for fishing for bleak. You can already see that it is much shorter, and here it is really about, for example, fishing at the winding rivulet, very close to the bank for small fish, or also for frogs, for example. For that, you can use it quite well. This is really the cheapest setup you can put together. The rod itself is, I think, under 70 silver. Then you add the spool, which costs 10 silver. And the most expensive part of the whole setup is the high quality line. Either in this case the microbraid or the snake invisible line. These are very high quality lines that work really well again and again when fishing for small, shy fish. And the rod I'm holding in my hand right now, which already worked really well here at the Balaya, is the rod from the video What to Buy in the Mid-Game, or What to Buy from level 20. I have even tuned this rod a bit finer, with a much thinner line, and only 9 kilograms of line strength. You could even go finer here. 67 kilograms of line strength on the fluorocarbon leader is absolutely sufficient here at the Balaya. Yes, size 1 hook, dung beetle in this case, the whole thing set to 1 meter depth, and it already starts working here at the Balaya. So yes, you can use it really well. And in terms of line strength, you can of course also use this setup later, all the way up to the Copper Lake when we go fishing for carp. And that is exactly what we're going to do next with this setup. And the third rod is the Bolognese Inferno. You can also use this one very well if you want to go for significantly larger fish later on. For that, you of course build the setup accordingly. Let's say around 19 kilograms main line, leader added, size 1 hook, potato cubes, and then you can already fish for carp with this much heavier rod, with 25 kilograms of line strength, the heaviest Bolognese rod here. So there are three different categories in float fishing: telescopic fishing, Bolognese fishing, and in the next video, we will also look at match fishing, that is, fishing with match rods. In general, you can say that there are differences for every single fish you catch. The base experience points on a telescopic rod are the lowest. That means if we catch a roach weighing 200 grams, we get the lowest base experience points on the telescopic rod. On the Bolognese rod, we get slightly more base experience points, and the most experience points we get when using a match rod. So what are the use cases of the Bolognese rod specifically? Because these are medium-heavy rods, they are especially well suited for medium-sized fish. The huge advantage of Bolognese rods is simply the length. We have a rod with 8 meters of length here, and because they are so long, we pull the fish almost straight upward. Fish have the most strength in the horizontal direction and the least strength when they are pulled upward. And that is something you can exploit extremely well with these very long rods, with these long Bolognese rods. You can create this upward pressure very effectively where the fish have very little they can counter with. Of course, when fishing with Bolognese rods, we also have to follow the basic rules of float fishing. That means, how deep do we set our bait? Under which weather conditions and at which times of day do we set our bait to the appropriate depths? These are all very important pieces of information if you want to be successful with float fishing. So make sure you remember at which depths, at which times of day, and under which weather conditions, whether it is raining, whether there is sunshine, and how warm it is, the fish are holding at which depths. And once you have gathered this knowledge step by step, and once you have gained more and more experience with it, you will be able to regularly catch fish successfully under similar weather conditions or at similar times of day. It is currently the middle of the night, so I'm going a bit deeper here now, and I will also cast out loosely again. Let's see if the depth fits here. 1.50 meters depth. And we even have a bit, yes. Is that already bottom contact? I do not think so yet. The float is standing slightly tilted. I'm currently using the Bolognese rig here. Bolognese rig and Bolognese rod. That naturally belongs together. So now we have the possibility here to fish with a float. And we already had a bite there, right? And it was not hooked. Too bad. So we now have the possibility to fish here with a float, and it is best if we take a closer look at it right now. So this is a float with a very, very long keel. And the nice thing is this long keel together with this long antenna on top, this long keel naturally has a certain amount of buoyancy overall. And this small float body then, of course, provides an additional small amount of buoyancy. But overall, we can always slightly overload the entire setup very well. That means that even very small and very delicate nibbles are detected immediately. So if you want to fish for very small fish with the Bolognese rig, especially in strong current, this setup is really well suited. So for bite detection, it is extremely practical. For fishing at very long distances, however, this is rather impractical. For that, the match rods become much more interesting later on. We will take a look at those in the next video. We also fish Bolognese rods mainly in the close range. We have 8 meters of rod length here, and if we then cast out another 8 meters, that is completely sufficient. So rod length times 2 is absolutely enough, because then we still have the rod standing nicely above the float, and then the hook set works particularly well with these long rods. So once again, cast out loosely. And in this case, we could now, of course, close the bail again and use the rod, or rather the entire setup, basically like a telescopic rod. The moment the float goes under, I now simply have to press the right mouse button and we automatically set the hook. And if the line gets a bit tight, I press enter once, pull in a bit of line, press enter again. At the same time, I constantly make sure that not too much line is drifting along on the water surface. Open again briefly, feed out a bit, close it again. With the enter key, simply open and close, let it drift a bit again. And when the float has drifted too far away, just reel it back in. Very similar to telescopic fishing, then cast out loosely again. And repeat the whole process from the beginning. Let it drift through loosely again. Of course, we can also use different rigs on our Bolognese rods. So we have two types of fixed rigs. That means the standard fixed rig and the Bolognese rig. These are rigs where we set the depth fixed at the bottom. And in the telescopic rod tutorial, I already showed you that we can place the bait in the current using a line clip. That means if I now set the line clip to 10 meters, cast out loosely, and then put the rod down, you can see here that the line clip is now set. And from here on the float, the 1.50 meters of fixed depth that we set now goes down further. If this were a sliding float rig, the float would continue drifting and the set depth would be pulled up to around 18 centimeters, to the minimum. That is exactly the advantage here with the Bolognese rig and the fixed rig. In this case, the line clip is set, and when a fish swims in and bites, the line clip releases at the exact moment the fish takes the bait. This way of fishing makes a lot of sense, for example, on the donuts or later on the llama. So here we now theoretically have the possibility, and there it goes, and now it is hooked. Very nice. Here we now have the possibility to stand at one spot with 3 rods at the same time. And then of course we can also try with 3 rods simultaneously, either by using different line clips, so placing the baits at different depths, or placing everything at one single spot. Here, we can of course also use the sliding float rig, and just as well we can also use the carp hair rig. We will take a look at the carp hair rig again in a moment at the Copper Lake. So when we use this setup to fish for larger carp, and later on in this playlist about float fishing, there will also be a detailed video about using the spirulino. For fishing at carp waters, the float rods are of course extremely interesting, especially starting from the medium-heavy float rods, because depending on the water temperature of the carp water, we can completely adjust to the situation. At Bear Lake, for example, it is currently cold, so the water temperature is set to cold. At the Amber Lake and at the Copper Lake, it is currently normal. And depending on the water temperature, the fish also stay in different zones. At cool water temperatures, meaning when the water is displayed as cold, the fish tend to stay more in the upper zone because the surface is warmed more by the sun. Attention, we're talking about cold or cool, not winter conditions. So we are not fishing in winter here, where it is 0 degrees or even colder, where the fish would then stay closer to the bottom. Instead, it is cool. At some waters, like here at Bear Lake, we still have an outside temperature of almost 20 degrees, but the water temperature is currently a bit cooler. Accordingly, as mentioned, the fish stay more in the upper zones. At normal water temperatures, the fish are distributed normally across the different zones, depending on their species and their preferences. And at warm temperatures, the fish tend to move more into the lower zones. We are back again at the Copper Lake, and that means I am now trying here at the Copper Lake to catch really big carp with the Bolognese rods. And one spot that is currently working really well, I am of course also testing here very simply from the dock. And especially when float fishing, I have to say a rod pod like this is extremely practical. Because especially in the moment when we are fishing here with 3 rods at the same time, and maybe we also have a very good bite frequency, and on top of that we are standing on a very narrow dock, then if we do not have a rod pod, we regularly run into tight situations. You put one rod down, not quite precisely enough because something just bit on the next rod, and suddenly one rod is in the way of the other. You cannot place it properly anymore, and you simply do not manage to set the hook in time. So especially for something like this, for such a scenario, a rod pod is perfectly suited. I have now rebuilt the entire setup once again, and this time with 2 heavy Bolognese rods and 1 medium heavy Bolognese rod. So, 2 in-game Bolognese rods and 1 medium heavy Bolognese rod. Let's take a look at those first. So here we have 14 kilograms of line strength on the rod. I'm using a 13 kilogram mono leader, a size 4 hook, a 19 kilogram monofilament main line, and the whole setup is currently baited with coconut and cream. With the normal temperatures we have here right now, I'm going for a depth of 1.80 meters. The nice thing is, even here we can use wagglers. In this case, these are the Pomor wagglers. You can only get them at the Christmas market. So it's absolutely worth buying these floats if you enjoy float fishing. And here as well, we first keep the drag relatively loose. I would say around 15 should work quite well. And then we place the whole setup here. So the next rod, these are the in-game rods. Here as well, I am currently using the reel from the Christmas market, the Full Metal 6000, 19 kilograms main line, 18 kilograms leader material, also monofilament in this case. And here I am currently using just a size 2 hook, again with coconut and cream. Here too we go a bit deeper, maybe only to 1.50 meters, so not quite as deep as the first one, and we place the float right next to it. Maybe pull it a bit closer so we are exactly at the lily pads. Open it again a little, let out a bit of slack. I usually leave the bail open as well. The moment I see that a fish starts working on the bait, I still have the option to pick up the rod. There is no vibration on the rod, or rather no vibration that goes directly through to the bait. And because of that, the fish does not get spooked since the line is still slack because the bail is still open. And then I also built the third rod very simply, just with honey dough, because that is also absolutely a valid option here. Very simple, just honey dough. Maybe we still have tench here at this spot. And this one is also set up here with the Bolognese rig. You can already see the huge difference here. The large wagglers, which you later also use for match fishing, and then here the small Bolognese float. And here, as always, the same rule applies. Normally you first have to analyze the spot. That means under these weather conditions on this day, I first have to test different baits. So on the 3 rods, testing different depths, different baits, different aromas to first determine what the fish actually want. Is this bait even interesting right now? And once I know that, I can then prepare a ground bait that is exactly matched to the aroma that is currently working. So I pull this one float back a bit again. Yes, and here we also have to walk a bit because we're dealing with extremely long rods. And here, I pull the third one back a bit as well. Step back a little more. Very similar to telescopic fishing. With these very long rods, we simply have to move a little all the time. We currently have very strong wind here, 8 meters per second of wind. That already makes float fishing quite unattractive, but I think something is still happening here. In this case, I now also close the bail, tighten the line a little. Yes, something is pulling now and then. I think there is something small on it. And on the third rod, there is something as well. On the honey dough, there is also something on. You can see the small float dancing slightly, and there it goes down, and it is hooked on the honey dough. Well, that is very nice. That means we can now apply upward pressure nicely. The fish has no chance at all and is simply pulled upward. It does not even get into a proper swim. Because the pressure goes upward where the fish has the least strength, it is pulled straight up with its head above the surface. And once that happens, it is already almost out of the water. And there is something on the other rod as well, also hooked. Very nice. All right, now let's not do this too hectically. Slowly reel in, keep pulling upward the whole time. Okay, it is something very small. That one, of course, just comes straight out, that is clear. But that is, as I said, the huge advantage of fishing with Bolognese rods. This length upward, we can basically work like a crane, go directly over the fish, pull the fish upward out of the water, and then slowly pull it toward us. Ideally, however, we still do not let the fish fly through the air, because that puts a lot of stress on the blank. That means we get massive wear on the rod, and that wear cannot be repaired, and we definitely do not want that. So ideally, we pull the fish toward us with its head out of the water, and then of course take the net and scoop the fish. I just checked again. The larger fish was just now at 80 centimeters depth. That means I now cast out loosely again. 80 centimeters depth. I have now set the retrieve speed to maximum, and that is something I do regularly. Whenever using match rods or Bolognese rods, I always go for the fastest possible retrieve speed. And in the moment when the float goes under, hold down the shift key, press the left mouse button, and simply reel in very fast. So when we are directly with the rod tip above the float, we basically only need to reel in quickly the moment the float goes under. This jerky retrieve ensures that the fish hooks itself automatically. Otherwise, there are no major differences compared to carp fishing. Depending on which species you want to target, all the usual rules for those fish apply. If you are going for small trout, you naturally use a thinner leader material, so fluorocarbon, to fish as transparently as possible with the Bolognese rod. If we are fishing for carp, we naturally use monofilament line with a nice soft stretch effect, which additionally makes the fight with large, heavy fish easier. And of course, we also have to follow all the rules for feeding and everything else that applies to carp fishing. In addition, besides using these Bolognese rods, for carp fishing, it is also worth using, first of all, a marker rod to determine the depth precisely. I already did that in the last video about telescopic fishing. And of course, using a spod rocket is also worth it, because when using a Bolognese rod, we do not have the option to use PVA or a feeder cage. That in turn means a spod rocket is extremely interesting for larger carp fishing or for fishing for species that are also targeted with ground bait similar to carp. That said, you can also absolutely save that for match fishing, because only with match rods does casting really far make proper sense. The self-hooking effect of the fish is many times higher with a match rod, and we also do not have to pay nearly as much attention to being nicely above the float before striking. I think we already have the next fish. Yes, I now simply close the bail, tighten the line a little, and yes, I think I can strike. Yes, this is now basically like fishing very simply with a telescopic rod. Just pulled upward, and now we slowly pull it toward us. It is so small, it is basically already flying through the air. 2 kilogram leather carp. Yes, very simple, just on honey dough. And that is, as I said, the huge advantage of float fishing in general. We can place our bait exactly in the zones where the fish are holding. There are simply species that are regularly found more in the mid-water, and those are much harder to target with bottom rods. So, get on the Bolognese rods. And if you liked it and it helped you, leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, because that supports me and helps me a lot. And then I will see you in the next video or in the next live stream. Until then, tight lines.